Dave, the big W is a graph. It gives us an idea of how a trauma can play out.
Mm-hmm.
But people's circumstances are all different, and their personal experience of the graph can be quite different. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the statistics tell an interesting story here. You know, with rape, say, 50% get PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but 50% don't. Combat veterans, the statistics, again, 40% will get PTSD and 60% don't. So the ones who get it, in some way, they've been caught up or hooked in the net or stuck on some aspect of what's happened.
Yeah. So they're caught on a part of the big W at a point.
At a point.
Or I guess could be caught at any part of the
point.
graph.
Yeah. Because in the graph you do get intrusions and you get unwanted memories come into your mind night and day. Sometimes these things are called flashbacks.
Yeah,
you know,
back to the flashbacks to the original trauma event.
In a very vivid, enlivened way. It's sort of etched into their mind, and then the flash will happen and they see it again. They're actually as though they're in it again, reliving it.
Yeah.
So that's particularly difficult for people. And then we've got what we call the anger response to some of these triggers that are happening for us.
What sort of triggers could we be talking about?
Well, say there's a royal commission into, use of chemicals in war or, with Australian troops, and then you find that, oh, yes, there was dioxin in there, but it's always been denied or not admitted. But it takes a commission to actually unearth it. But that can trigger a lot of anger and distress.
And you might just be watching this on TV or listening to the reports from the commission on the radio, and you say, what?
Yeah.
They knew. Yeah.
Yeah, and the veterans groups, they'll communicate with themselves and mention these things. So it's a cause of great angst that not only were you in a war zone, you were betrayed by the people who were meant to look after you.
And triggers can be, I know, well, I've watched movies, but a loud bang or a backfiring car, that sort of stuff, apparently will set some veterans off very rapidly.
Well, that's right. Or a helicopter that sounds the same or is the same as one that was used back then.
Yeah.
That will cause them to dive and hide or avoid.
So people that are getting stuck, they can get very angry as well. And possibly not get past their anger sometimes.
That's right. There's sort of, in the anger cycle, there's the explosive anger, but then there's the long-term simmering anger that's just under the surface, ready to be triggered to blow. That's very difficult, but it can be very destructive if the anger's turned out to other people or in on yourself, so people do, they can become violent, and violence is an action, and they can turn that on themselves as well. So it's not a good mix, this way of being. Then there's the people who get really anxious and panicky,
And it seems to me that sometimes people can pass through that stage, but then something throws them right back into it again, and the panic and the anxiety levels skyrocket again. So
that's right.
You can pass through it, but you might get thrown back into that state again.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And that's where the graph isn't, you get through one and you're out of it. You're not necessarily. You can go back to these.
Yeah. At the acceptance or the meaning and the acceptance stage where that's got to be a hard journey for some people.
Yes.
And I mean, you've often used the term, you need to accept the unacceptable. Well, that's hard to do.
That is hard, especially if you won't. You won't accept this stuff. You know, no one should have to accept this stuff. But there comes a point, well, maybe you can't accept it, but you certainly do have to adapt to it. You know, you have to live your life with this bit in there that's like a lump in your throat. You can't accept this thing, but life goes on. You still have to get up in the morning and feed the dog. You know, so it's you're right. It's a very difficult thing to go through. We've touched on the meaning, say, with the commission brings out new facts about what's happened. That certainly can affect the meaning of it. And
what in what way do you mean the meaning for the individual?
For the individual. Maybe for the group. You know, that can change when they realise what a hopeless situation they were actually put in.
So they were in a situation that they weren't in control of and didn't even know that. Or
you end up in a situation and then all hell breaks loose. You knew you were in a war, but you didn't realise that this was going to happen, you know? So there's lots of very grim and in-your-face sort of things can happen in those situations. And instead of going up to accept and adapt, what you can do is, in the meaning of it all, you just get bitter and angry that this is what happened to you, this is where you were put, and this is how we were treated. So you can become quite bitter, angry. You know, sometimes they use that word, bitter and twisted. You know, it sort of unhinges you.
And is there anywhere to go once you get that? Like, how do you live the rest of your life and move forward from these events?
Well, it's an interesting thing. What happens to the people who don't meet and live in the dark side of this graph, or you know, in a way, they've successfully negotiated through it, learned how to handle it or distance it effectively, and so they're able to grow in a different direction in their life, away from this thing that has dominated their life. So it's like post-traumatic growth. It's like people have new careers or they become involved in other things. There are ways to help you with this. You know, there are some highly successful therapeutic approaches that help people get unstuck from PTSD, and they're worth going into if that's how you are. There's cognitive processing therapy, which has elements of CBT in it. There's EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy, reprocessing, EMDR, and there's also, say, exposure therapy that works for some. That's being exposed to the thing in a graduated way with graduated relaxation built into the process of being re-exposed to that stuff. And these all take time, but, 12 weeks or more. But in the hands of a good practitioner, this can really help get you unstuck and moving in another way, Apart from the ones who naturally learn how to manage themselves and go on and live their lives and find new interests and do new things. It's like one veteran I was working with, he didn't speak for about the first 6 months. So, but I did a lot of talking in that time, and a lot of it was educational sort of stuff. But eventually he worked his way through it, and he then got into going down to the local veterans and talking with veterans, and listening to them. So it was like a real turnaround and a real point of growth for him. He went from very stuck to very helpful, and So there's good examples of this, and getting involved in those therapeutic approaches, EMDR, CPT, exposure. They've all got the runs on the board in terms of successful evidence-based practice.
And you've said to me previously that a big part of trauma is education and learning about what you're going through and what could happen. And that's, I guess, where the Big W is very helpful, because it gives you a roadmap of where you are, and if you're working your way through it or coming back again to a stage, at least you know there is a way to go with help or however.
Yeah, because overall, if you're suffering from this, one of the drivers of PTSD is avoidance. You want to avoid anything to do with it. The big W, you don't want to look at that.
Yep.
So you avoid anything that might do that, but you need to be able to overcome the avoidance to then face this and then look it in the eye, and then with help work your way through it if that's where you're stuck.